did he say, "Fuck you, Jeff"?
He has said it a few times. He didn't right then because he was in his sadness more than his anger. If it had been one of those angry ones, oh yeah, that person has said it to me before, and we are still dear friends.
Hey there. I'm John Sirakis, and this is The Climb, brought to you by the Digital Mastermind. This is the show about journeys. It's the podcast where we talk to digital agency owners about business, marketing, and technology. So if you want the latest tips, tricks, tools, mentorships, you want to be a mentor, we have a tribe just for you of digital agency owners. We stay in constant contact via Slack. We have a yearly meeting. So if you have questions or concerns, anything, please reach out to me, and you're going to want to join one of our fantastic weekly calls. And now it's not just only for agency owners. We have opened it up to your entire staff. So shoot me an email, Jon, Jon at digitalmastermind.com to get more information. This is the mastermind group that your agency needs to take it to the level that you want it to be at. And today we have an episode that speaks about coaching and leadership. So if you are an agency owner, you're anybody on your team at a management level, this is the episode for you. And David and I spoke with Jeff Nischwitz, who's a former attorney, author, and a wildly successful business coach. So, David, why don't you come out here and give us your thoughts on the episode?
Thought it was a solid episode. I mean, I will admit that I was slightly disappointed that I could only get a bunch of questions in after we wrapped up the interview, because I actually stayed on and talked to him for like 25 minutes after we cut the interview. But it was really enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think there were some things I was confronted with. He has a different perspective, and I love that. We can have people on the show that have a different perspective. We still remain friends. Love Jeff. He's a great guy, golfing buddy. But I think it's how we define strength and weakness as it comes to our leadership, right? Where he has examples, and some are huge successes. He mentions the gentleman that wrote the book Transfluence, which we should probably put in the show notes, and how he led his company. But I again think it's like fingerprints. A lot of those things I would not have done. And it appears the things that I am doing, we're doing, are working.
Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge that I have just at DMG, yearly meetings, is when people talk about the way that they do things. And, I go, well, what we're doing is working, and I'm not going to deviate. One of the things that I always harp on to you and to our team is that we can't constantly be chasing shiny things. If you have something that's working, don't mess with it. It's working. Now, I guess you could challenge and say maybe it's not working as best it could be, but I could find other areas that aren't working nearly as well anyways, and I'm going to focus on those first.
Yeah, and I think when we have a conversation like his, where I'm confronted, where I think one of the questions was, if you're a leader and you're exhausted, you should tell your team you're exhausted, or whatever that was. And I was in a disagreement there, where I think it's that flow of that information. But he brought up some other great points, which vulnerability isn't all about emotion, right? So there's a ton of really great content that's in this episode that I think a lot of our viewers will be able to walk away from. What I would love to see is in comments where people potentially either they say, "Hey, I see that more from Jeff's perspective," or "I see that more from your perspective." I would love to open up that dialogue, because I don't think we have enough of that.
Sure. I follow the leader model as the classic definition, where my problems don't roll downhill. My job is to clear the problems from everyone below me so that they don't have to deal with it, and lead them to where they want to go. And I don't want to put my, exhaustion on them. Like, I feel like now they're worried about my exhaustion.
Oh, but I would love to meet. I think it also behooves us, though, to be experienced with leaders that can do that, because that's a completely different perspective. It's not necessarily a right or a wrong way. It's what works and doesn't work. And I love the examples that he gave. I mean, to give 1,600 people a month before you tell them, hey, some of you might stay or some of you might go. I personally don't know how I would react to that. I think I would instantly, if I was working for a company, would say, all right, I got to go find another job. I'm not the exception.
I guess it depends on how long I've been there, how critical am I to the current company? Because I've been in situations where there was an imminent takeover, and I just bounced because I knew that there was no special hook there for me. I'm not staying on. Then again, I've been a part of a takeover that I was special, and I went through it no problem. So I think that for me, that's where because I remember like one company that I left. I was the last employee to receive this level of share ownership for just signing up, right? And when I was leaving, everybody's like, "Are you kidding me?" Because this was in the days when every employee at AOL instantly became millionaires overnight, or when Google went IPO, and like all the regular people were becoming millionaires, and they were like, "You're giving up your shares? You're crazy!" And I'm like, "This company is not going to IPO for anything like that." I was like, "I'm going to take my chance and leave." Because I'm going to make $30,000 real money over and above what I was getting paid. And it turned out that after, I don't know, 7-8 years, they ended up IPOing at a valuation, not IPOing, they ended up getting acquired at a valuation that was lower than my strike price. So if I would have hung around for another 6 years hoping for this magical payday, I actually would have lost money if I executed my shares. So
good decisions.
Exactly. So,
and a lot of where my concern comes from, I think we had a team of 8 at the time, and I said, "All right, hey, things aren't looking so well. I was just trying this whole open thing, and 2 people went and got jobs elsewhere." So everybody was happy, as far as I knew. It was a great place to work. And when I asked one of them why she was leaving, she said, "You said things weren't going so well." Like,
right.
Yeah. And I was like, "Yeah, but things will go better. We can all pull together or whatever." She's like, yeah, but things were going well. It's like, okay. Like that logically tells me, like, yeah. I lost, a little over 20-something% of my team because, yeah, absolutely. And that's totally right. I don't blame her. She had things going on in her life that made her move. I believe it was the same for the other guy. Truthfully, I didn't do a exit interview with him. But I think it also comes down to everybody's fingerprint. How you lead is going to be different than how somebody else leads. There's some leaders out there that get the absolute best from people by screaming at them all day long. Yeah. Like, was it Bobby Knight? Right? So, and his players that work for, that absolutely. He made me go to the edge and find wings to fly.
I believe you can only do that when you have success. Bill Parcells is a famous coach for being a complete ball buster, just like a Bobby Knight. And you even got like a Bob Huggins in there. Like a player's coach, like a Pete Carroll is known as a player's coach.
Yeah, Tony Dungy.
Yeah. And they won. They've been successful, but they haven't been able to sustain it. They got lucky 1 year or 2 years, and that was it. And, I attribute that to they got lucky with the draft or with free agency more than the coaching inspiring sustained victory like Bill Parcells, like Bill Belichick, like Bobby Knight. I mean, these guys, Bob Huggins. I mean, these coaches have been, the ball buster leader coach for multiple decades and sustained success. That's the leadership I want.
That's the one that you identify the most with.
Yeah. Right? Not the ball busting part, but the do your job. Like I love that saying from Bill Belichick. Do your job. Don't worry about anyone else. Don't worry about other people's jobs and what they're doing and what they're getting paid or anything else. If you just do your job and everyone just does their job, we're going to be succciuscul.
As long as people believe in leadership.
Correct. Yeah. And if they don't, they bounce and it's next man up. I absolutely love that.
There's a guy named Michael Bungay Stainer. He's a really sought after business coach as well. And he says there's 3 types of work. There's bad work, there's good work, and there's great work. And how they define great work is when you're actually doing what's in your job description. I love that. It's super simple. Good work is like replying to your emails and like all the the nuanced things. You're keeping everybody happy. But what's in your job description, that great work, is what really sets the standard and helps propel you forward in your career.
I like that. I also watched a clip, some inspirational thing. I think I sent it to you from some speech in the 50s or something where it says, what's
Earl
the
Nightingale. Yeah, dude, that thing's real famous. Yeah.
Is it? All right. So I like when he says, what defines a successful person? It's not they make a lot of money. It's not they have a lot of power. It's that they're doing the work that they were meant to be doing. And I was like, yeah, that's 100% successful, because you can be, I feel very successful. I'm not in the top 1%. I'm not in the top 10%. You know,
You're fulfilled.
Yeah. I'm doing the work that I believe that I was meant to be doing, and I'm doing it at a high level. And because of entrepreneurship, I mean, it's like you level up. Like, 8 years ago, I wasn't worrying about the things I'm worrying about today. I'm worrying about bigger level, bigger picture things. So it's like being an entrepreneur has like a built-in challenge metric that I really like.
I also think it's having a close relationship with reality. And a lot of people don't have that. And that's one of the things when I coach somebody, just like, okay, well, what's actually there? And removing all of those self-inflicted obstacles where people will literally put those things in there, whether it could be a physical thing, whether it's their workspace and the way they go about it, or it can be imaginary, where you are literally just going through this Q&A session with them, and you deep down find like, yeah, you just have a negative thought pattern. Like, you literally believe that you are a loser. You believe that these things aren't going to happen. And on account of that, you deserve the exact situation that you're in. There would be no other reason that you would be in a better situation, because you're choosing this.
They seek it out.
Yeah.
The self-fulfilling prophecy. And one of the things that we deal with kind of along those lines is employees, for some reason, always like to hire the future solution before the future solution is needed. Right? It's because they don't have to really look at the purse, the bank account, and have the consequence of spending. And they always want to spend first, and the demand will come. That's not how business works. The reality is the demand must be there in order for us to spend, or you're putting everyone at risk. And so a lot of people don't have to live in that reality of, maintaining the bank account.
Yeah, it's that sense of resourcefulness too. What are all the things that we can do to solve this problem rather than try to buy our way out of it? I think it's innate now in our culture, especially with younger generations. How can we spend our way out of this rather than, all right, how can we figure this out? There's, for instance, the coaching thing, when there's multiple people and there's like a backlog of work, one of the easiest things that people tend to go to is, hey, I'm going to just hire a resource to plug it into there. Well, what if you offer a challenge and there's some type of award that's won based on somebody doing the largest piece of that work, or there's a benefit by everybody getting this done a week ahead of time? And those are good leadership things to instill, but it seems on the team dynamic, nobody on a team ever comes up with that. It's instantly, how do we just get somebody in here to just reduce some of this pain, which is rarely a good decision, because you have to find that person, you have to train that person, and then you don't even know if that person is going to be a fit. So there's even a higher risk component that's in there that's not even visible to a lot of the people that are in making those decisions.
And you could end up just dampening the effectiveness of your current team by bringing in a new resource that they have to train. I famously make sure that we don't hire when we're in the suck. When we're in the trenches and we've got a deadline, you hire in that moment, you guarantee you're not making that deadline. You wait, you tell your team, we've got to get through this, and then I'll make sure we add somebody. But right now, it's 100% focus getting this done, and that's it.
And I think a lot of what we share is looking at the side of vulnerability, and this is touched on in this episode a little bit, where we share through previous stories. There's a point where you offered a great anecdote in there to explain that, instead of us saying, hey, yeah, let's just go ahead and let's just go ahead and share from a standpoint of agreement, right? Where it's like, yes, this all does suck. And I think, you know what? There's a better way to explain this. Maybe you can edit all this out. The better way to explain this is, do you know the definition between compassion and empathy, the distinction between the two?
No.
I just learned this the other day, and I love this, right? Empathy is where you share a problem with me, and we're both now in that problem together.
Okay.
You're like, oh, hey, I just lost $10, and you're like, oh, you lost $10, and I'm feeling that, same emotion with you. Compassion is where you say, hey, John, I lost $10, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah. For a moment you feel it, but then you resolve to a form of solution, into assistance and help. And I think as leaders, there's empathy, which is a word that's getting tossed around tons and tons all the time. But I think it's all right. People coming from that side of compassion to momentarily feel your pain, but then say, okay, how can I help take that pain away and get you to where you need to go?
So a lot of times when employees bring issues to me, that's where I go. Is I find a way to relate with them. I might not have gone through that now with you, but I've gone through something like that. And then once I show the empathy, then that's when I bring in compassion and say, all right, this is how we try to solve that. This is how I solved it for me. So
yeah, I think it's the best way to relate. It's stories, right? Mm-hmm. It's all right. This is from my past, and it could even be from like 2 weeks prior. But when you want to get somebody to move through, it's like that. A lot of sports movies have that cliche where they're like, all right, Billy's in the hospital. Billy's not going to make it. Well, Billy's not the one giving that speech, right? So yeah, exactly. So that's my mentality. The guy and gal that's given that speech, that person isn't sharing anything of how they feel other than the damn determination to win.
What's the Denzel Washington movie that
Some Titans?
Yes, that's exactly what I thought of. That guy gets paralyzed, and it's like, I don't know, was that guy's name Billy in that? It was something like that.
If it ain't, it ought to be, right? But that's the thing. It's that cliche, right? There's always somebody in the hospital. I think it's even the same thing in Hoosiers with Gene Hackman. I think it's somebody's in the hospital. Yeah. But the guy and gal that's given that speech is not the one that's sharing that. And I think that's one of my biggest takeaways from this episode is I didn't realize there was that distinction. And I think Jeff was an awesome sport in this. I had a great time riffing with him.
Well, on that note, let's get at it.
Boom. All right. Everybody, here's the episode. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, John, it is my pleasure. Long time no see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been all of, like 48 hours?
Not even. We're at about 40 hours. That's all right. I've forgotten the golf, but I'm in the moment. No.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will get better on the back nine, it appears. So to start things off, I would like for you to give our listeners, including Dave and myself, your climb. What does your journey look like up until this point?
Well, I love the idea that it's a climb because there's a lot of crevices I fell down, and it's sometimes without a rope. So it's a good metaphor. The condensed version is that people always ask, how did you go from being a lawyer to being this speaker, this business coach, this in many cases a life coach? Like, how'd you get there? And I said, well, I'd love to tell you it was a great plan, brilliantly executed, but it's not. It's more like a car wreck. So if the car wreck was a climb, there was a cliff involved and a curving road. And I was driving down this road thinking I was on the right road, and the car left the highway, rolled a few times, but miraculously landed on its wheels. The car was drivable, damaged. The driver was damaged, bumped, bruised, probably a few broken bones, but it was pointing in a direction, and I drove in that direction. And people say, oh, come on, Jeff. And I say, actually, that's more true than any sort of I had a plan. And so to fill in the metaphor, I started my career as a lawyer, 17 years worth. I've now been away for 19 years, so I consider myself fully recovered ex-lawyer. And what happened was I got into the law. I thought that's what I wanted. I was successful at everything I did, law firm partner, started my own firm, built that into a success, and then realized I was miserable. I mean, literally I did not want to go to work every day if I had to practice law. I wanted to run the business, not practice law. And I walked from all of it. I walked without having a plan, without knowing what was next. I just said, I've got to leave. I've got to go find what is me, and had some real significant stumbles along the way. My first business post law ended up being a failure. Great learning, great learning, but it ended up failing and put me in, a lot of holes in my life. And then I started scrambling up the cliff again. You talk about that climbing. I brushed myself off, set a couple of broken bones, and started climbing. And then I love this new metaphor you gave me, because sometimes I climb with a broken arm, one arm at a time, because I was coming back, and it led me to working for others, learning to build great relationships, and then found my way into this business through writing, coaching, speaking. That's really this is heart stuff. This is calling stuff. This is, why would I ever stop doing this work? And I'm still trying to figure it out, but that's the short version of the climb and the falls and the reclimb.
So what happened that got you into the coaching piece, though? What steered you in that direction? Was it an interaction with another coach? Was it somebody just asking for your advice, saying, hey, I'll pay you for it?
This is the thing about the car wreck and the no plan. In the early 2000s, I decided to write a book. And I wrote a book because I always wanted to write a book. And I had been doing a little bit of training and workshops for lawyers on how to run their law firms like a business. And frankly, one of my dear friends sent me an email. I don't remember the year. It was June. I do remember that. And said, hey, I'm so excited. I just published my book. And I was pissed. I was like, well, she wrote a book. Why can't I write a book? So I said, I'm writing a book. It took a couple of years, and it ended up being a book for lawyers and law firms on how to run their business more like a business. But I had no business. I had a job at the time. I was doing business development for a large public company that sold professional services. I thought I was happy. I thought I had carved out this niche within the corporate world. I told myself I wasn't selling out. And miraculously, a lawyer at a law firm in West Virginia bought my book, called me, and said, I love your book. It's the best thing I've ever read on running a law firm. We're using it. And he said, do you do coaching? And I gave him the correct answer. Yeah, I do coaching. And he said, well, what's that like? How's it work? I said, well, it's all customized. What are you looking for? 2 weeks later, I had an engagement to coach 13 of their lawyers. I did that, and I got done. I said, this is really cool, and I think I'm really good at this. And so maybe I can have this business of coaching and speaking and training. But I still was in the mindset, I've got a job and I need a job, because now is not the right time. And that was such a sticking point. It's got to be the right time. And I built a website, but I didn't make it public, because I said, look, I've got a job. When I figure this out, when I get ready for a smooth transition, that was the story, smooth transition time. When that happens, then and only then will I start this new gig. And 6 months later, the universe once again said, it's time. The company I was working with brought me in and said, we're in a deep recession. Our business is really struggling. We love what you're doing, but it's new. We ran out of runway. We're letting you go. And I remember sitting there thinking, I need to pretend to be upset, because in my head, what I realized was, now is the time. This is the universe saying, no more waiting around. And my big learning from that is, it's always the right time for the right thing. So there was a lot of conspiracy going around me, but I set the tone. I took the steps. I wrote the book. I put it out there. And then I just started saying yes to what got presented to me.
So you've been coaching for 20 years now, around
12 years. 12 years.
Oh, 12 years. Sorry.
I think I just hit 12. I'm starting my 13th year.
So your 13th year, and you had no prior coaching experience before that first coaching gig with the gentleman in Virginia.
Did I? Yeah. I had no coaching experience, I had no coaching training. As I look back at how I coach today, there were some foundations, but I didn't know they were foundations. It's kind of like Steve Jobs talked about in that graduation speech. You always have to look back to connect the dots.
Mm.
And so, for example, a lot of people say, well, you must have brought a lot out of the legal career. 5 years ago, my answer was, yeah, not so much. Yeah, no, I was really good at it, but no, I left it behind. And then people said, well, you're really good at questions and lawyers are good at questions. I said, well, yeah, no, because lawyers ask questions to get something. They're very self-serving questions. They're trying to get questions to either use against someone or to benefit their client. It's a manipulative process. That's not my questions. But what I did learn that I learned as a lawyer that served me really well is to really listen well and to listen beyond what people say. Like to hear what they say, but say, wait a minute, but there's I call it now pulling threads. And I could pull threads as a lawyer. And that's something I learned is to be really adaptive as well. So a really deep listener beyond the words and to be quick on your feet because I was a trial lawyer and people were always coming up with surprises. You had to be willing, no matter what the situation, to adjust, including I remember one of my late trials, like one of the last cases I tried. I remember we walked into trial and the defendant, it was a business, had told us what the theory of their case was. And when he does his opening statement, it was almost the exact opposite. Because I think he had realized how weak that case was. And I'm sitting there going, well, this is going to be interesting. My whole case is based upon something that he just changed. But I didn't panic. I just said, okay, here we go.
Adapt to the situation.
Adapt to the situation.
The pulling of the threads, something I had a former business coach, and he would say that was listening for the unsaid. Like, what is the unsaid in this conversation?
Well, and one of the things I've added, I guess it's kind of a term I use, I don't hear this a lot, is because I will tell you, I'm really good at questions. People sometimes think that means I've got this book of standard questions. I have a few good ones, but it's more what I call, when I listen to someone, I listen for the next question. So I'm listening for what's unsaid, but I don't tell them what's unsaid. I just keep listening. And a lot of times it's an intuition thing and the questions come to me, and part of it is being willing to share it. And the risk is, I'm being paid to take the risk, but the risk is how are they going to respond? Because I can tell you as a coach, which I didn't know getting into the business, the greatest compliment you get as a coach is when your client swears at you.
What?
Oh yeah, it's like whenever they do it, I go, "You're welcome." No, I'm not going to use the word. I don't know how the show rolls for you, but
yeah, dude, you can use any word you want.
Okay, man. So very typically, I will ask a client a question, not tell them anything, but I ask them a question that causes them to learn something about themselves that they may not have known before, and it's often uncomfortable. And a typical response is, "Fuck you, Jeff." Fuck you. Damn it. And then they'll breathe and I'll say, "You're welcome." And they'll say, "God, I did not see that coming." I said, "I know. So let's go from there." No, because it's a guttural response. They literally, it's something that they did not. I'll give you an example without names. So one of my coaching clients a few months ago, we're talking about what's going on his business side, but of course it really interacts with his personal life. And now we're talking about his interactions with his wife and how some issues they have, because my work is just so integrated. There's no separation of business and personal. However you're showing up, the issues are there. And he's describing all these scenes, and I got what I call a hit. And the question that came out is, I said, "Do you test your wife?" That's all I said. And his response was, "Fuck you, Jeff." He goes, "God, yeah, I never even thought about that. I do it all the time. I totally set her up, but I don't know I'm doing it. And I said, well, she probably doesn't know you're doing it, but she probably senses you are, which could be a reason you're having these challenges. Because how would you react if your partner was regularly setting you up to see and sort of test you to see if you're going to pass the test? So initial response was not happy, but then he laughed and said, man, then a great question follow-up from him was, so what do I do with that?
And the answer is?
Well, the answer is the same for everybody. Ultimately, we're looking at changing our behavior and how we show up. And the starting point is becoming aware. In that case, if he's regularly testing his wife, it means he also tests other people around him. He tests them in many ways. If he's doing that, that's going to create a disconnect in their relationship. It's going to certainly create a lack of trust in any relationships he has. Now he's aware of it. And he can do it less, because basically what he's done is he brought it out of the unconscious. He was not conscious he was doing it. Sometimes I will say he's bringing it out of the shadow, sort of that blind spot. Well, now it's like it's a process. So imagine a blind spot in a car. If you're driving at a very slow rate of speed, as you move, that blind spot changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is to keep moving it out here so that I can see it and know it's there, and actually you can go look for it. So when he engages, now by the way, here's the typical, it's a setup scenario in our interpersonal relationships using testing. I test you, John. You in some way fail the test. I get triggered by you failing the test, and I react to you and at you based upon you just failing a test. And you have no idea what happened because you'd even know that you were being tested. Yet I'm interacting with you in a way that doesn't build our relationship. It breaks down trust. So now whenever he feels like, I'll say, how do you usually feel? He'll say, I get angry. I start to get angry. I said, well, every time you start to get angry now, ask yourself, who and what am I testing? Because that's a typical, it's a cycle that he's created, a pattern. So now he can check in, and often that'll quickly take him out of the anger, because when we're thinking about what the anger is about, we get rid of the anger, especially if it's about me, not the other person, because he's angry at his wife or his coworker. But when you ask yourself the question, why am I angry? It's a beautiful question, because it recognizes that I'm the one that's angry. And I'll tell them, if your answer to that question, why am I angry? Why am I sad? Why am I frustrated? Whatever. And the answer is about someone else, it's the wrong answer. It's not. It's something about you, because it's your emotion. So he can say, oh, I'm the one that's angry. And now his anger goes down. He starts to separate from anger. And now he interacts with that person, not with anger, but with just whatever the data of what's happening.
Jeff, don't you feel that people lie to themselves? I feel like I encounter a lot of people that their inner monologue is telling them something they are, the person they are is not the real person. It's like almost like an imposter syndrome. And I'm like, the person that you see inside is not the person you are.
It is one of the biggest lies on the planet. It is so prevalent and for a couple of reasons, and it varies a little bit. This is not research based. This is anecdotal from my experience. The lies are a little greater often for men. The nature of the lies, in that imposter syndrome is so prevalent in our culture today. It's almost everyone's got some version of it, but only a small percentage have acknowledged it and said, yeah, that's true of me.
But in imposter syndrome, when you don't feel like you're big, like let's say that you're going into trial, right, using your litigation background, and you don't feel like you're worthy of litigating. That's imposter syndrome, right? Like you're impostoring an attorney.
But imposter syndrome could be anything that's not who you really are. So if you have doubts, if you have lack of some insecurity on anything, but you show up and you put on, I call it a mask, because one of my earlier books was called Unmasked. I put on this mask that says I am confident. I'm an imposter right now, because I'm showing you a face that I think you want to see, or the face I want you to experience. So we've got multiple lies. The people who say I don't have any imposter syndrome, I don't have any lack of confidence, I don't have any doubts about myself, but you look at their behavior and say, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Then you've got the lie to the point when I ask these questions, which is why I need to press in. The first answer to most of our questions is not true. It's some form of lie, and it's usually designed to protect ourselves. It's a protection mechanism that I've got to be okay. That's why, like when someone said, when you look at why I did that or why I like who cares questions, like let's say they're angry. I'm so angry at my business partner. Well, why are you angry? Well, he called this meeting and didn't tell me. So he called a meeting. But why does that make you angry? Well, everybody would be angry. I said, actually, not everybody would be angry. Actually, some people would be ashamed and feel like they're failing somehow. But you happen to be angry. Why are you angry? Which is why you got to get back to yourself. And it's a lie to say it's about someone else, because you've probably got to go 5 to 7 layers deep to figure out the why. And I'll give you a real quick example. And there's lies in here, but they're not overt lies. They're unconscious protective lies. Talked to a client, this is a couple years ago. It's a very vivid example. He's struggling in his marriage. And he said, I'm just terrified about what's going on with my relationship. I said, well, why are you terrified? And his initial response was, well, Jeff, obviously, because I might get divorced. And I said, I don't think that's that. He said, well, yeah, I'm terrified of that. I said, no, you're terrified about something about divorce. So what are you terrified about? He said, well, what kind of impact it's going to have on my kid? I said, yeah, what if it's not? Or I may have done a so what? Because I'm really trying to say, what's the thing you're really going to, because what I find is when you hit the right spot, it's no longer words from the head. It's almost guttural. People will literally stop breathing, not like dying, but they'll sort of like they got punched in the stomach, the oof. And he's like, well, it's my kids. It's what's my family going to think. It's as we're going to have a relationship. And he goes down like 5, 7 things. And I just kept saying, well, but what if it's something else? What if it's something else? What else? What else? Or so what? And finally, there was this long pause, which is when I knew something good was coming. And he took this deep breath and he said, under all of this, my biggest fear is I'm going to be alone. Because I've always had this fear and this belief that no one's going to want me and I'm going to end up alone. So when his voice changed, I said, so what's your real feeling? He said, I actually feel really sad. So he was afraid, but his real feeling is sad. And I said, so knowing this, can you now interact with your wife differently as you try and rebuild the marriage? He said, absolutely. Because my whole approach was I was hanging on so tight because if this doesn't work, I'm going to be alone. And I said, so how do you think this works? He said, not well at all. She feels pressured all the time. It's not a relationship. It's me forcing this to work. I said, so now come from a place. But was it a lie? Yeah, it was a lie. But it wasn't him consciously lying. He just had never gone there. And when he did, he could change. It doesn't guarantee the marriage will work, but it does fundamentally change how he interacts with her. And the same thing applies to situations at work and everywhere. Better understand what's really happening in us. Now I can relate to you differently, communicate differently, listen differently, do everything differently.
Did he say, fuck you, Jeff?
He has said it a few times. He didn't right then because he was in his sadness more than his anger. If it had been one of those angry ones, oh yeah, that person has said it to me before, and we are still dear friends to this day, and he says it to me every once in a while.
So, I've gone through moments in my life where I think I've probably experienced or gone through that cycle, and what I always felt was the challenge that you have to endure is that feeling that you get when you're vulnerable, when you admit the thing. How do you maintain that for lasting change? Because everyone can feel vulnerable and sad and whatever that emotion is at that moment. And it's same with people at work. There's employees that they have this aha moment and it lasts for 2 weeks. and in 2 weeks they're right back to the whatever they were doing. So, like, from your experience, like, how do you get people to make it stick?
Couple of things. First of all, they've got to be willing to hang out in the uncomfortableness, and sometimes it's actually painful. You know, when I get swore at, it's because it's really uncomfortable. It's not something I knew, and there's a voice says, I didn't want to know that. What do I do with that? So there's, at some level, they've got to be willing to hang in there. But the key is to get them focused on what's the outcome they want, to get back to their why, and to help them understand this is not going to be a light switch. It's not, for some people, it changes quickly, but it's still not a light switch. And you identified a huge issue that has to do with vulnerability. Today, if you go out and Google vulnerability and leadership, you're going to find it everywhere because everybody's talking about it. You're not going to see it as much, anywhere near as much as it's written about and talked about. And part of that issue is because leaders, which are predominantly still in our culture, especially with larger organizations, predominantly men, there is a gender dynamic here. Everybody has these issues, but there's some different for different genders. But the latest surveys I've seen are leaders, their deepest fears are that I'm not going to come across as confident enough. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to have all the answers. And yet, those are like some of the keys to vulnerability, the willingness to say, I don't have all the answers. To be willing to, even like during COVID, something that some companies implemented that was really helpful, especially where people were. I mean, here's one of the realities of COVID. A huge percentage of people around the world, I'm more familiar here in the US, the research is already saying they have experienced some version of post-traumatic stress. This has been at that level of stress. And talking about what are the mental health issues going forward with hundreds of millions of people have experienced some form of post-traumatic stress. Not going to label it syndrome yet. So a big issue during the last year was how are we supporting our people? And one thing companies did, which I think was really healthy, is they started doing check-ins as part of their meetings, which is just to ask people, how are you doing? And creating, I call it creating a space where they can be honest. This is not a gripe session. It's not even a solve session because you don't have a solution. But for example, giving me the space, if I come in and say, or I'm on a Zoom call, for example, to say, man, I got to tell you right now, it's been a struggle. I got 2 kids in school. They're struggling to stay focused. One's doing well, one's not. I'm on here all day and I get it, but I'm really stressed out by that. We don't have a solution. We can't fix that, but we can say, wow, I hear that. Is there anything we can do different to support you? But at least we want to make sure you feel seen and heard on this. But imagine if the leader says things like that too. Whoever that leader is says, I'll tell you what my struggle is. I'm finding that I'm working harder than ever. Like I don't stop because I feel like I have to work all the time. And I got to tell you, I feel like some days I'm not bringing enough here for you. Saying that is so powerful, but so terrifying. There's this, I call it the collision between the vulnerability that's needed and the fears we have of being vulnerable, that I'm going to be judged for that. And I will add this piece. This is how I see the gender difference.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So that was a leader saying that to his or her employees, right?
Yeah.
I look at that as whining. I don't want to hear that from a leader. You know, I just think it's like, I'm working too much. It's like, yeah, great. I don't know that to me, I don't see that as a leadership quality, but I would like to explore this vulnerability side. I can understand showing other means of vulnerability, but to me, that just doesn't seem like one of them I'd want to hear. I would look at that as weakness.
So there's the issue right there. That's what they're terrified of you. They're terrified of that belief system.
I'm coming
because think about it.
I think that's just my upbringing. That's the lens that I look at things through. Now I could see vulnerability showing compassion, showing gratitude, showing caring. But if a leader's complaining that they're working too much, yeah, to me, I I do look at that as weakness.
So
I was trying to
notice two
recalculate,
things.
and it came to the
So
same.
yeah, most of us grew up with it, as did I. The question is, do I change that lens and start to see that there's another thing required for leadership? So notice you also used the word, you said it's complaining, which is, that's not true or false. That's the label you put on it. So let me ask you the question this way. Do you believe that leaders struggle?
Sure.
Okay. So if leaders struggle, but they don't share that they struggle, is that strong or weak?
If they're sharing it with the people that are looking to them for their leadership, I think it's a different dynamic. I think there's certain things you can share with your team, and there's certain things that you can't. I don't believe sharing about the struggles that, in using that example specifically, like I'm working much. I think that's just one of them that can be shared.
So here's the thing: when you say to someone, I don't want you to share your struggles. I believe in a way you're saying, I don't want you to acknowledge that you're human. So I want you to keep pretending that you're not human. And what I believe is, and there's been a shift in our culture from this one. I'm 62 years old this year. My dad's 84 this year. I know the culture he grew up in. I knew the one I grew up in. It was all about, first of all, there was no such thing as team engagement. I don't care how you're doing. You collect the paycheck, come in and work hard, put in your time. And by the way, we'll take care of you for the rest of your life. Now that shifted in my working generation, I started working full time in 1984. In the 1990s and certainly early 2000s, we started to find out that corporations are not going to be there forever. The promise got broken. But so what's happened is what people want and need has shifted, but I don't think leadership has shifted enough. We're still leading most of the same way, because what you said is right on, John. This is what I grew up with. And this is probably how I was led. And I saw it that way. And in fact, I'll tell you, we had on our podcast 4 months ago, a guy named Walt Rakowicz is his name. In fact, I don't know why. Maybe this is why. I happen to have his book here. It's called Transfluence. This is the guy who was telling you about playing golf the other day, John.
Okay, right. Yeah.
And turning around a huge multinational company that was failing. And when you ask him why, he said, it was all about vulnerability, authenticity, and transparency, and me acknowledging that I had real challenges going on. Now, his challenges were, I don't know all of them, whether it was working too much, but here's the thing. If you notice, as I was saying that, part of the information was that he was working too much. But what he was really saying is, I'm struggling because I feel like I'm letting you down. I don't know what to do with this.
So I think a leader, so to touch on John's point, I tend to agree with John but what I hear you say is the value that we get from the digital mastermind group as a peer group. And when we get together in the mastermind group and its owners in the peer, there is lots of vulnerability and there is a lot of sharing. I don't necessarily feel like it's the smartest thing to push that down to your team, because they're going to echo back whatever you send to them. And I want them feeling confident and ready to take charge. And so I want to show that strength, but
here's my pushback. If that's what you teach your people to do, then they're going to destroy themselves, because they're going to blow up emotionally. Their marriages are going to fall apart. They're going to be shitty parents. They're literally going to have health issues because there's no place, because they've been told by you, no. We don't do that here. We don't want any of that there. Leave your personal lives at home and the trash can outside. And that is, I can tell you from talking to the team members, that's how many team members feel in this country. They're saying, my company says, leave my life in the dumpster. I can pick it up when I leave, but while you're here, suck it up, do your work. I don't want to hear about your issues. I don't even want to know about what's going on in your life. Do your job, get it done, and take care of, and then leave the rest out there.
Okay,
that's what they're hearing.
So this brings up a couple of things. One is I believe somebody should check their personal stuff at the door when they're going to come to work, right? So But then two, at the same time, I understand people are human, so we have those personal discussions, right? So it's, hey, once you cross the threshold, you should come into work mode, right? If you want to be a high performer, right? But at the same time, they're human, so we can have those conversations. But I also look at the leader as being like the therapist, where the therapist isn't sharing their woes of what's going on in there with the patient. The flow of information goes one way, because when the therapist is giving it down to the patient, what is the patient supposed to do with that information?
Well, coaches do, though. If you listen into my session, half the session is me sharing my journey, so that person says, this is not a guy who's trying to tell me something he's never done or faced. This is somebody who's actually been where I've been. And I don't know. I've had limited experience with therapists. I know some people say, I don't like therapy because they seem like they've got it all together and they're a train wreck. I said, yeah, they usually are. But coaches are the ones that are doing their work. And I will share that. And I'll go back to this. I'll offer this another person we talked about on the golf course, Larry English, who has an incredible culture. I mean, it's off the hook. And not just because they win awards. It's because I know people that work there. They're getting it right. And when I said, Larry, what's been the secret? And by their way, they're an all remote organization. They got 1,000 employees. He said, it's two things. I and all the leaders have to model vulnerability, not just expect it from our people. We have to go first. And we invite people to bring their personal lives to work. Because part of this is, I really believe we have an old belief system that says if people bring their personal lives to work, that's griping, bitching, whining. It's just acknowledging that they're human. And so let's change the story a little bit. Imagine that person comes in, a team member, and says, right now, I'll tell you, my check-in is, it was a tough weekend. One of my parents is sick, and I can't see him because of COVID. And it's really hard. And part of what that does is it gets them more present at work. Because by just putting it out there, they're not walking around pretending that's not there. They've told everybody. It's not about sympathy. It's not about solving. It's just saying, wow, is there anything we can do to support you in that? So people feel supported. And there usually isn't, but they got heard. And then the question is, if they're sharing, but the leader isn't, what's going on there? They're going, well, does this leader all have it together? Or are they not willing to share with me? They don't trust me? Or are they pretending it's all together? Because I know it's not all together. I know they've got stuff going on in their life. Are they better than me now? So ultimately, though, the question in all of this comes down to this. Whether you're a leadership role or not, too often we look at ourselves and say, this is what I believe about my leadership and what I believe is true. And it's completely false. The only thing that matters in your leadership is what other people think.
Sure.
Now I don't want you to be out of integrity, but with yourself. But what I'm saying is it's other people that are led by you, right, that decide what kind of leader you are. Your opinion is irrelevant, frankly. And too many leaders don't get that. I said, it's like, you're totally irrelevant because they're the followers.
Correct.
They're the ones that you got to decide. And we don't know. It's hard. We can't get an individual answer from all of them on these things. And something to keep in mind, because there's actually some brain research that says our brains don't hear the word not. And like, for example, one that I pick up as a trigger for me, someone did it a month ago. We were on a call and I was talking about a very potentially sensitive topic. We were talking about a diversity and inclusion question. And they started to give me some feedback. And here's how they opened. I don't mean to offend you, but here's what I just heard.
But I'm about to offend you.
Now, I actually heard it okay. I was really open because I want to learn and grow. And we talked about it a while, and I said, are you open to some feedback? She said, yes. And I said, when you said, don't be offended, I felt my walls come up. I felt myself saying, well, she's about to offend me. So my suggestion is don't open with that because you set the tone with that word. And all I'm saying in that is there's that thing about this is not what it is, just tells me probably one thing, people need more information to understand why it's not that. And number two is, and this is what I say to a lot of companies, it makes me wonder, are there some trust issues that are an undercurrent? And most companies have some level of trust issues. They're not usually overt, but they're these undertones of whether they trust what they hear, when they hear it, all those things.
And I think a couple of things there. One, don't ever lead with a negative. I highly agree with that, whether it's a sale or a lead conversation. But I think transparency is healthy to a point. But I can't believe there wasn't an exodus if you're going to tell 1,600 people that the company's not doing well and we don't know if you're on the chopping block or not. I
forget, but I know there wasn't an exodus. If there was, it was a tiny percentage.
Yeah, and I think
believe it's because they trust the leadership team.
Absolutely. And that's the only thing I could think that could make everybody stick around. Like, you would have to be true through every other process where everybody felt bought in. And I think that's the deal, and that's a wonderful place to start from. But with that, where do you see that leaders, is it just transparency for vulnerability? Like, what are the other things that leaders can do to increase vulnerable conversations?
I remember a conversation with a client a few years ago where it was a small business. It was maybe 10 or 15 people. She had a really horrific year emotionally. I mean, her father had been ill. She had basically watched him die over 6 or 8 months. And I said to her, I said, how are you doing with that? She said, it's been brutal. It's been brutal. And I said, well, do your people here have any sense of that? And she said, oh, no. I never share any of that here. I don't talk about it. They see no emotion from me here. And I said, well, why not? And her answer, this is quote, almost a quote, well, what do you expect me to do? Come in here, lie on the floor and cry? Because that's what I do at home. And notice how absurd that was. Like, would you think I would ever suggest that? Of course not. But she went to this extreme example, which I think is how we justify, no, we're not going to be vulnerable because it means that. But there's this aversion to vulnerability. And I said, well, let me ask you this. How might some of your team members perceive you because they haven't seen any of your emotion? And she got really serious and said, cold, uncaring, unloving. And I said, is that true? She said, no. And I said, so it's not about the extremes. It's about what's that, just bringing something of yourself here to let people know that you are human, because that's what this keeps bumping back to, letting people know you're human. So emotions are sometimes part of it, but acknowledging you don't have all the answers. I hate to keep coming back to it, but his story is so compelling. Walt tells a story about acknowledging at the highest level he doesn't have all the answers, acknowledging that you're struggling with something. Here's an example of vulnerability. Asking questions instead of making statements. Questions, open-ended questions, are actually vulnerable versus telling people things. There's a vulnerability in that. And so, in fact, even being empathetic to others, there's a vulnerability in that. You know, how empathetic are you if you're putting on this empathetic act, but you're basically saying, I don't need any empathy from anybody because I got it. I got it all together. People in relationship want to see that there's a relationship. It's not a trade-off. So a lot of these things are subtle. I think last year, 2020, really highlighted the need for empathy. I think one of the big challenges for leaders today, and it's coming in the future, not right now, is what do we do with our teams in terms of coming back to work? Because we not only have the practical question, is it physically safe? But you've got team members who were working on the office before, now they're at home, and almost every one of them has had a different experience. Some have loved it, right? The ones who I would say love it are the ones who, in some cases, don't have kids, where they've said, this is awesome. I don't have to commute. I have more time in my life. Some with kids have said, this is great. I have more time with my family. I have more dinners at home. I'm actually more productive than ever, and I don't have to waste time commuting. And I love this. And you got people saying, I feel alone and isolated. And now you've got the range of people that says, Sam is 66. He's at high risk. Like, what are we going to do with the vaccine, folks? Like, employers right now are freaking out. Are we going to mandate you have to have a vaccine to work here and come in the office? Or is it going to be okay to say, for personal reasons, don't want to get the vaccine, so I don't want to come in the office. I want to work at home? Are you going to say everybody has to come to the office? This is going to get really juicy really fast. And our old thinking, it was my thinking growing up, is we have to treat everyone the same. And someone said to me last year, I think going forward that it's going to be, are we willing to treat people differently to a degree to recognize very different situations in this world today?
Well, we got to be careful with treating people differently in this world today.
I know, exactly. That's why when leaders say leadership is hard, I said, you think leadership was hard pre-2020? Oh my God, it got amped up, and we're in it because the decisions are becoming different.
I think data is going to make a lot of those decisions, though, right? It might be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. I think a lot of people are going to keep whatever their COVID policies are now. You can work, or you can come into the office. Not sure about the vaccine. That seems like that could be a legal matter. But I believe you're going to see KPIs come back to. It's like, okay, working from home is better, or working from the office is better. And then it's going to get down to the fingerprint. Everybody's different. So what works for them might be part of those HR conversations. Well, hey, you're not doing too good at home. It looks like you need to come into the office, and losing those privileges.
Well, it would be great if we actually, when we get the KPIs and the data, and to see if leaders follow it. Because a lot of leaders are going to find is that a lot of their people on the things they measure are more productive at home. My opportunity as a leader is to have a broader lens. We say leadership's supposed to be strategic and visionary. Well, part of that means your ability to look beyond this tiny sliver and see the whole picture. And are you clear what you expect of your people? And typically, what do we expect? We expect things that are easily measurable. The key word is easily.
Right.
And we produce a group of people who are really good at the easy measurements, but they don't have the skills and the abilities in the more difficult measuring areas because we didn't take the time to craft that. Because it's often more qualitative than quantitative, those measures.
And Jeff, what would you say is a good tool to align a manager with an employee? And the reason I say that is one of the things that I always look for is if you can tell me what you want, can align that with what the company wants and get you there. Do you have anything that you recommend to create that type of alignment?
Ask the question a different way. You said a tool. Tell me more about what you're talking about.
Or a means, right? So to create manager-employee alignment through coaching, do you have any mechanisms or methodologies that you use? Is it personality tests?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a mixed bag. You use all of those. Certainly, you can use personality tests, different assessments. There's DISC, there's Myers-Briggs, there's Strength Finders, there's calipers. A lot of them tend to, in my experience, tend to be skewed. Some of the newer ones are skewed towards sales. So you got to be careful. Is that really the position you're looking for? So part of it is these tools, but the tools are only as good as the clarity the company has about what it's expecting. Most people, on-the-job training is not a good plan. We've got to sit down and talk about things like, what do you value here? Like, what do you want, but why do you want it? And here's what the future looks like, and here's what we're looking for. But you've also got to know what you actually want. Like if you say, we want you to be good with people, that's a worthless statement. What does that actually mean? I want you to have these traits of how you are with people. I want you to be a good listener. I want you to be a big coach, which means I want you to be better. Like this would be one for me. You need to be better at questions than anybody in the building. Because that's the best, I believe the best way to develop our people is through questions to help them self-assess. That's the best feedback that we can get is to have people self-assess. I teach questions. I teach different ways of doing feedback. So we've got to get clear on what it looks like. Then we start asking them questions. We use the tools to see where we do have a fit, where we don't. And the tools are getting more refined, but they're not the only answer. And I joked about this because I just did a new assessment, which is how I roll in my business. I'm doing a session with a company in May. They're working off a certain assessment tool. And I said, well, I want to take it because I want to know what they're looking at versus not being an outsider. So I just took it. And when I looked at it, I said, wow, no wonder I never did well in corporate America. If you look at my assessment, it would have to be a pretty radical company that would hire me, because it basically says I hate rules and I want to do it my way.
And that's
well, I do what I do.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not going to accept your rules unless you can justify that rule to me. And I don't care if you've done it 20 years. If the rule sucks, I want to change it. And I don't want to do it because like there's this, it's on a disc, and it's a disc that's not just the disc DISC, but it's got your values, and one of them is individualism. It's like a 92%. And I'm talking to this HR leader who's my contact, and I said, I'm guessing very few companies would hire me with that. She goes, oh yeah, it's either going to be a company that's really values that, or that's the nature of their company. They're super innovative. They're always they're looking for disruptors. But the company that's looking for people to get things done, oh, they're not going to hire you. I said, yeah, that's kind of why it didn't work so well. Because I succeeded my way. I'm not good with rules. Rules are more of a suggestion to me.
So, okay. So that's, I can see the management side of things. How does that work out?
The management side is great because I empower people the same way. I typically limit the rules. I focus on what are the outcomes we want. And, as long as you can achieve it in alignment with our values and our timelines, beautiful. I don't want to have a bunch of rules on you. I'm very aligned with that. I'm going to interact with you the same way. And it puts a lot of
our team. Yeah,
it gives people a lot of personal responsibility.
Yeah,
I give them a lot of personal power. That's empowerment. That's how you empower your people. Not if you tell them how to do it, then that's not real empowerment. And if it's the perfect way to do it, if you have such a thing, okay. It's not about everybody doing everything they want, but it's really about, so what do you think? How do we solve this? And what looks better for you? How is this not working? And if we don't have a values disconnect over it, sure, go for it.
So what would you say to owners, right? Most of the people that listen to this are business owners that are looking for a coach, or that don't even know they need a coach. What are those signs?
Yeah, well, those are two different questions, but they're related. The question about whether you need a coach, go back to what I said a while ago. You don't know. A lot of people don't know if they need a coach unless they're willing to be really honest with themselves. The answer is going to come from others. Have you done a 360, and do you have enough trust built into your organization that you think that 360 is helpful? One of the things I love, and I keep coming back to this story, it's just so profound to me, is my friend Walt, who is one of the most empathetic people I've ever met in my life. He's so empathetic that you just go, whoa. But they did a 360 when they were in this turnaround situation, and the feedback they got that he scored low on empathy. And it was really hard for him to hear because he saw himself as very empathetic, but because he was vulnerable enough to be open. See, there's the vulnerability. I don't like this. I didn't think it was true. And what he learned, because he started asking questions, was people said, you're going so fast right now, trying to do the right thing, that you're not making time for us. And so he said, I got to find a space to keep moving the ball forward, but I still need to bring this, because otherwise I lose the people that matter the most, is the team that supports me. So sometimes I'll also say to leaders, do you feel like things are getting in your way? A lot of times, sometimes it's, I'm feeling stuck. Sometimes I'm feeling alone. Sometimes I feel, someone says, I feel like I'm my own biggest enemy. There's a coaching situation, because there are obstacles. One of the things I say I do as a coach, I like visuals, is I help leaders and people who think they're running a 100-yard dash, but they're actually running a 100-yard hurdle, turn it back into a dash, because those obstacles are mostly of their own making. I can help them remove those obstacles so they can get back to running the race they thought they were running.
Remove the distractions.
Remove the distractions, remove the old stories, remove the old triggers, remove the old patterns.
Cut your head off.
That's funny we talked about that, because actually I'll tell you, John, I didn't tell you the whole story on the golf course. The first time I said that to someone, I was at a networking event. It happened to be a woman, and she said, "Do you have any unique strategies as a coach?" And I said, "Well, I came up with one, but there's one slight problem with it." I said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's not survivable." I said, "What?" I said, "It's not survival." And I was really dead serious. I said, "Yeah, that's the problem. It's not survival. It's a brilliant strategy." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, if we got a really sharp blade, like a sword, I like swords. Swords are cool. We could cut the person's head off during the time until they bleed out. They would have so much clarity in what they really need to do, because our head is our problem." And that's the funny metaphor, but the truth is very close to that most of us are very head focused. And this we perceive the head as very safe. And the reason is the head is where we concoct all the versions of the truth that fit our story. This is where the lies are. This is where the doubts, this is where the self-confidence questions are. Yet when I'm going to deal with a problem, especially with me, I go, let me go think about it. That's like the alcoholic saying, I need to work on this. I'm going to the bar and do some shots. Because the key is to integrate what I'm thinking with what I'm feeling and what I'm intuiting, and getting those aligned. And the most dangerous to me is the head, because this is where I rationalize things. This is where I justify things. This is where I look in the mirror and say, I'm a really good leader today. Yet 5 people may have had a very different experience of you that day. And you may have broken trust in 7 ways that way. But if you're not able to see it, so are you open? Are you willing? The coach can help us see those blind spots. And as I said earlier, move them around. Because back here, the truth of blind spots is they run the show. They are in charge, and the only way to take them out of charge is to bring them out here, and is basically disempowering them by being more aware of them, and thus those hurdles.
So would you say most of what maybe you do as a coach, or what coaches should do, is it to help people just correct what's in front of them, or is it to push them forward so they get more? And more out of life, or out of their business?
It bumped a little bit there, John. Can you repeat that? It bumped a little. I didn't get all the words.
Would you say that most of what you do as a business coach, or most what business coach do, is it to correct what's in front of somebody so they essentially organize their life, or is it to get more, to push them forward to get more, whether from their business or from their life?
I would say it's both, but taking one word out, because for me, there's no pushing. The pushing, they push themselves, but I use the questions for them to help motivate themselves. Because if I'm pushing them, what happens when I go away? What happens when I go away? And pushing is momentary. So for example, if I can help them get things out of the way, so now they're running a sprint versus the hurdle. So I'm helping to get those things out of the way. On top of them, helping them get clear on what they really want at the end of the race, and really connect to the meaning of that, and show them on top of that. So the third step, so let's remove obstacles. Let's help you really understand what you want and why you want it, because it may turn out you don't really want that. Let's get clear on what you actually want. And then let's give you some tools to help you get there along the way. So it's a trifecta. It's all of those things. And when people can do that, you think about it, why do they need push now? Because we remove the obstacles. We've got them motivated to get what they really want, and they know why. And we're going to give them tools to get there. There's no pushing anymore. It's more of an invitation, and the push comes inside of them. And that's the difference between, to me, inspiration and motivation. I can't motivate anybody, because motivation is in here. But I may be able to inspire them to tap into this so they can show up more authentically, more genuinely as who they are, more full on, and more empowered, and therefore more powerful. Notice I said powerful, not strong. And they can go kill it. They can just go kill it and have it. And I will say this, doing it in a way that serves all of them, whatever that is for them. If someone comes to me and says, look, I'm married, I've got kids, and I got a business. I don't care what happens in my marriage. I don't care what happens to my kids. I don't care if I'm a good father or not. I don't care. I just need to kill it over here. First of all, I'm probably not going to work with them. It's okay. We just have a values disconnect. But usually it's someone that says, I'm not sure I'm killing it anywhere, or I'm killing it over here, but this isn't working. And then I'm saying, well, I'm afraid if I come over here and do this, I'm not going to kill it. No, they're all related somehow. So I'm typically working with people who are looking for more of the whole, not just
Okay, so your
how do I
preference is
make more money?
on life and business. You don't
Yep.
see a separation necessarily between the two.
Nope. The more we try and separate, the more stress we create.
So with, and I know we're almost coming up at time here, a couple other questions. So when it comes to business owners, what are the things that they can do now to make sure that they're either A, being the best leaders, or B, being the best coaches to their team members?
A couple things. One, in terms of it's go out and get that feedback. Do whatever you can to get honest feedback, and know that if you haven't built good trust, you may not get honest feedback. I would encourage them to get some help to ask the questions, because how we ask the questions can change the input we get. Make sure you got a good set of questions to get that. Sit down and talk to the people close to you. Again, it'll depend on trust, both at home and at work. Sit down with your peers, sit down with the people that report to you, that work with you every day, and ask them very specific questions. And some of those questions are things like, actually I have a whole survey created around leadership, where the leader answers the questions, and then you have others take them, because it's things about vulnerability, it's things about trust, it's about impact. One of the things I think that leaders need to be better at is taking more responsibility for the impact they create in others and in their team, even if they didn't intend it. Like, one thing that I don't want to hear from a leader is if I say, hey, when you did this is how it impacted me, and you say, well, I didn't mean it that way, so move on. That's really arrogant. Like, but you had an impact on me. And so basically what you're saying is, I don't care what the impact was, because I didn't mean it that way. So get over it. Well, first of all, I trust you less now, and you're no longer safe to me, because I got to say, okay, so I got to do it your way, and you don't care what impact you had on me. And when in high trust environments, those are the conversations we start to have. And I think I keep saying we got to come back to trust, because every engagement I've had with a company for the last 13 years now, every one of them had trust issues. And only one in all those years came to me saying, we have a trust issue. One. Everybody else thought they had other issues. We have team issues. We have communication issues. We have process issues. We have accountability issues. It always came down to some trust issues. And if companies aren't willing to work at that, that's not going to change, because trust is the thing that's most often assumed and most often lacking. Because it feels good to say, oh, we're good with trust. And we're terrified. It's one of the most terrifying conversations to have with another human being, is about a lack of trust. And of course, it takes a lot of trust to have that, right? And I'll share this really quickly. A very good friend of mine recently had this conversation with his wife. And I love that they have this trust in the relationship, because he said, do you trust me to handle this? And she said, actually, I don't. And I said, how was that? He said, that was really hard to hear. But he said, the good news is, because I trust her, I didn't react. I mean, it was kind of a gut punch, but I said, so can you tell me more about why you don't? And she said, well, here's the past experience. And it wasn't her saying, I don't trust you in general, but I don't trust you with what this is right now. That's a powerful conversation. And I think in our workplace, it's a difficult one, but so vital, because for example, you've had people that weren't working out at your company before. And there's a range, right? There's the people who are epic failures, and it's move on. Let's move quickly out of this. But then you got the people that are, maybe they were, but now they're not performing, or they're tweeners. And part of the truth of that is you no longer can count on them. And if you can't count on them, that means you don't trust them with whatever it is. And I have seen a lot of people who, believe it or not, and unfortunately, if we don't like it, telling them we couldn't count on them didn't get their attention. Telling them that I don't trust you got their attention, and they changed.
I love that. That brings up something I'd like to have a whole nother podcast on, but I got to put a pin in there. There's one last question. Actually, there's two. One is, what does the world need to know that we haven't shared as of yet?
I love that question, and I hate it. What does the world need to know? Yeah, it's all about you, as in me. It's all about me, or if I'm speaking to them, it's all about you, in that how I show up as a leader is mostly about how I work on myself and grow myself. How I interact with people is about how I understand myself and how I trust myself or not. The impact I'm going to have is going to be about the work I do within here, because that defines how I have influence with others. That's a tough lesson, because most of us want to look exterior, but the work is in here. And I also borrow this line from, I think it was Wayne Dyer, that said, when you change your perspective, when you change your perspective of an experience, the experience actually changes. And I'm a big believer in that. So a lot of what I do is about shifting perspective, how we see things, how we see ourselves, but it's an inside job. Leadership, life, and relationships is an inside job. And the best relationships, the best leaders, the best of all of this are the people who I believe are willing to do the work on themselves. And if not, then get out of leadership.
Hey, crystal clear. Last question. Is there anything that you would like to plug or promote today? This is your space.
Yeah, I'm going to do it generally right now because some stuff's rolling out. But if you check out my website, or just reach out to me on social media or my website, nischwitzgroup.com, or email me, jeff@nischwitzgroup.com. There's two things I'm rolling out as we speak. One is a peer-to-peer networking group at multiple levels, where owners of businesses more established as well as newer companies. I've created a group for under $500,000. This is a chance to grow your business and grow yourself. It's about working on all of it. I call it growth, because that's what it's about. We're going to not just work business strategy, but we're going to work business strategy, marketing strategy, sales, team development, all those things. We're also going to work on what are those blind spots, targets, triggers, patterns. Very holistic. It's peer-to-peer plus coaching with me. The other cool thing I'm excited about, also launching right now, is called Be a Man. And it's not corporate at all, although it impacts corporate. It's a place, it's a group coaching program and development opportunity for men who are ready to better understand, like, what does it look to really be a man? Because most of us grew up with a message that said, you got to do this to be a man, or don't do this or you won't be a man. It's understanding that there are ways that men can show up differently in our businesses, our relationships, as parents, as friends, and showing men a path to that. I have a deep passion for work with men. I've been doing it in nonprofit world for 10 or 11 years, and I'm bringing it into my business. So I have a lot of excitement about the Be a Man program as well.
Perfect. Jeff, hey man, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate all the wisdom you bestowed on us, and you gave me. I wrote down a couple things where I want to have you on again, and I want to hash out some of those thoughts. Really appreciate you being a good sport today.
Well, thank you, John. I really am grateful to be here. It was so much fun, and along with Dave, not David, Dave, right?
Hey, David.
Well, everybody, most people have a preference.
Usually David in the professional world and okay. Dave in the personal world.
So this is a split. So you're Dave, David.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
And it's D when you get really down.
No, it was my pleasure. As you can tell, I love just sitting and talking and having conversations. The only thing missing to make this more perfect is either a cigar or for me, a red wine or a bourbon.
All right, run on, man. We'll have to do that one next time.
Right on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye now.